First ever stunning admission from a woman who accused Duke University lacrosse players of raping her nearly 20 years ago. The story was a national firestorm. She now says she lied about the encounter. Crystal Mangum first made the claims back in 2006, saying 3 members of the school's lacrosse team raped her after she had been hired to dance at a house party the team was throwing.
Imagine being falsely accused of sexual assault over 20 years ago. Although not being found guilty, you more likely had to still deal with the stigma of being accused of raping someone, sexually assaulting someone for nearly 2 decades. That's the case of the Duke Lacrosse team from 2006. Having to deal with a false allegation, a false accusation. The alleged victim just recently came out and admitted that she lied. Check it out.
First ever stunning admission from a woman who accused Duke University lacrosse players of raping her nearly 20 years ago. The story was a national firestorm. She now says she lied about the encounter. Crystal Mangum first made the claims back in 2006, saying 3 members of the school's lacrosse team raped her after she had been hired to dance at a house party the team was throwing. Police charged David Evans, Colin Finnerty, and Reed Seligman after Mangum's accusations. But after much back and forth and the city's DA stepping down from the case, North Carolina's Attorney General later dismissed the charges, citing a lack of evidence. But now, going on the record on a podcast nearly 20 years later, Crystal Mangum says she was lying the whole time.
Let me know how you would feel if this was you, had this been you. You had been falsely accused and you had to wait nearly 20 years for your name to be fully exonerated by the victim itself, the so-called victim. How do you think you'd be feeling right now? Would you be able to find it in your heart to forgive, or would you be dealing with some deep-rooted resentment, which would be understandable? And make sure you stick around to the end, because we actually hear from Crystal Mangum, the alleged victim.
I testified falsely against them by saying that they raped me when they didn't, and that was wrong. And I betrayed the trust of a lot of other people who believed in me. And made up a story that wasn't true because I wanted validation from people and not from God. And that was wrong when God already loved me for who I was.
Now, just for clarity's sake, Crystal is currently serving time in prison for murdering her boyfriend not that many years ago, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember the exact date. They'll probably bring it up here in this video. But it seems that she's had some experience while she's locked up. People always talk about, they always call it basically like jail cell or even foxhole religion, how some people get closer to God when they're at their wits' end, when they might be facing life or death, potentially life or death issues, whether it's they're locked up dealing with some pretty serious medical issue, or whether the foxhole thing comes from being in combat or being in a potential combat zone. But let's hope that she has a biblically sound profession of faith, and that she learned from the things that she did, and that she's truly born again.
Regardless, I didn't need to seek validation from him because I already had validation from him. I just didn't know it. And I hurt my brothers. And I hope that they can forgive me. And I want them to know that I love them. And they didn't deserve that. And I hope they can forgive me. And that I hope that they can heal and trust God and know that God loves them, and that God is loving them through me, letting them know that they're valuable and that they didn't deserve that.
Now, when she says her brothers, I don't know if she's talking about actual family or if she's referring to the former lacrosse team. as her brothers. I'm not sure. Maybe as time goes on, we'll hear some more information. She'll speak out a bit more and clarify her statements. But when Jim Acosta said that this was a firestorm, my goodness, he couldn't have been. He couldn't. I mean, that's putting it mildly. I actually did a presentation speaking of, regarding police brutality a few years ago. I'll link the video right up here. In it, I make an argument as to why we can't always trust the immediate media narrative. Oftentimes, the media will use a situation like this to help stir some of the racial tension in our nation. And the Duke Lacrosse team case was a prime example of that. These guys were basically the media turned out to be judge, jury, and executioner on these people, on these young men, simply based on the fact that they were white and the alleged victim was black. And they were dragged through the mud. They had threats on their lives. I mean, the whole thing was tragic. But I'll say this much. I'm at least thankful that she's capable and willing to come out now and admit her wrongdoings.
Joining me now is CNN's Gene Casares, who reported heavily on this case. Gene, give us a sense of how impactful and controversial these accusations and the result were at that time. I remember, you remember this story all too well. I mean, this was literally a firestorm of a story back in 2006. The entire country was watching it. And to hear this admission all these years later, it's just extraordinary.
And let me know what you think. Do you think the media, now we already know, especially a lot of these mainstream media outlets, you think they'll actually learn from this? You think over the last few years, there have been so many times where they put out information and basically said that XYZ was fact, and then you give it a few weeks, months, sometimes even years, unfortunately, and then we come to find out that their initial story was completely inaccurate, but they had already judged this individual as being guilty. I think the last, dang near 10 years with Donald Trump is a prime example of that. Dude was accused of all kinds of stuff, but ultimately, most of it was found out to be garbage. The Charlottesville, good people on both sides allegation turned out to be a bunch of crap. The Russia nonsense, bunch of garbage. The Hunter Biden laptop turned out to be completely factual, but the media held water for the Democratic Party and said it wasn't honest, said it looked as if it had all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. All the while, the FBI knew that it was legit. But they went to Facebook and X, used to be Twitter, and these other social media outlets and news stations and basically told them that this story needs to be suppressed. And they did it. But then come to find out later on, after the election, later on down the road, years later, months later, they came clean and said that it was legitimate. Time and time again, we've been misled by the media. And one of my biggest hangups is, when are people going to finally wake up? When are we going to realize we can't trust them and we need to find other media sources?
Young lives were destroyed at that time. You know, it was 2006. It was Durham, North Carolina. I was there. I was covering this. And Crystal Mangum made the accusation that she was raped by David Evans, Cullen Finnerty, and Reed Segelman. And there were charges, very serious sexual assault charges that had terms of imprisonment for the rest of their lives. And in Durham, that's where it started. And everyone took Crystal Mangum's side because she came out with details, very specific, graphic details. And the young men said, we didn't do this. But Duke University did not stand by them either. They were just really silent. But everyone was focused that she was telling the truth. They weren't. Then it went to a national level, and their names became household names. And they were taken into court on these very serious charges. And they were in college. They were at Duke University. Furthermore, the lacrosse team, their entire season was canceled. The coach was fired. So there were ramifications from it. Now, 1 year later, the attorney general exonerated them of innocence. But there's so much more to the story. I was in the courtroom, and Mike Nifong, the district attorney of Durham, was charged with criminal contempt and then also for disbarment of his bar license. And it came out what the truth was. One of the defense teams had a young attorney, just got out of law school, and he would stay up at night reading the thousands of pages of DNA evidence. And he found something in one of those thousands of pages that confirmed that their DNA was not a part of DNA that they had collected from her. And that DNA evidence is actually one of the major factors that they were exonerated. And that came out during Mike Nifong's trial. He was convicted, by the way, the district attorney who had stood by her and had done many interviews about how she was raped so viciously.
When I did some research on this story, again, if you have ESPN Plus, you can go to check out their 30 for 30 documentary about this case. All you have to do is look up the Duke Lacrosse team and it'll pop up. A powerful, fair, very balanced documentary where I learned so much. I saw it years ago and I was moved by it back then. But the narrative was the DA, Mike Nifong, was running for office in a very Black community, high Black population community. So he went the racism route, made claims that this was all racially motivated, and basically screwed these young men over. And he was willing to sacrifice their lives, have them locked up, probably for life, in order to gain power. Man, that's why I tell y'all over and over again, you can't trust these politicians. You cannot trust the media on almost any level, especially on the mainstream, because there's an agenda over and over again. Let me know what you think about this. Were you familiar with the Duke Lacrosse team case? Again, how would you feel if you were those lacrosse team members? And what do you think? What are your thoughts on Crystal Mangum? If you appreciate content like this, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.